Today we have a special broadcast of iPulse Perspectives. These are turbulent times on the American political scene. The Make America Great Again movement, the MAGA movement, is particularly powerful and popular in Florida. Not only influential with Florida leaders, but also with the Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump. Some say it's having a dangerous effect on the state and the country. Lynn Professor Martin Phillips spoke with Palm Beach County Attorney Dave Aronberg for this edition of iPulse Perspectives. Aronberg is not only a Democrat, but a legal analyst for MSNBC.
Do you worry about the state of Florida and what's happening here?
I do. I think we've become a MAGA petri dish. We have attracted a lot of the real extreme MAGA voters from across the country, and it's made us much more conservative. And then you end up with things like, punishing Disney for speaking out against a bill that shouldn't have been passed to begin with, that Don't Say Gay bill, which now they've settled, and now by the settlement it shows that it was a political bill. Now that the governor is not running for president anymore, now he can reach a settlement with Disney. He can reach a settlement on the Don't Say Gay bill. So after the hot lights are turned off and the cameras are turned off, it's interesting how things happen. Then cooler heads prevail, and now you can actually do policy. But when you're running for president, you have different priorities. But in Florida, we have attracted a lot of the country's real most hardcore right-wing voters, and that has changed our state. And so now we have, for example, a 6-week abortion ban. We'll see what happens when that goes to the public in a referendum. But now, if you want to be the optimist, and I'm always an optimist, I think it's made the rest of the country, if you're a Democrat, it's made it bluer. Because when you take all these hardcore Republican voters from swing states into Florida, what do you think that does to the states where they came from?
Right. There are so many cases now against the former president. The civil cases in New York State, the federal cases. What is happening to the legal system here?
The legal system in our country was not prepared for someone like Donald Trump, whose strategy is to delay. And normally, if you have a strategy of delay, eventually the clock's going to run out on you. But when you can become president and then undo everything, that creates a greater sense of urgency. And the criminal justice system, our court system, really wasn't built for this unique situation. Right. Plus, you have a federal judge in Judge Cannon who has been slow walking the strongest case against Trump, the Mar-a-Lago documents case. And I'm not going to accuse her of corruption because she was appointed by Donald Trump. I'm not going that far. But I will say that she's a relatively new judge on the bench, and she's by herself in the Fort Pierce courthouse. And because of that, there's no senior judge to help guide her. She's all alone there with her and her clerks. And so she's dealing with a very high-profile, somewhat complex matter in this classified documents case. And you see some rulings that are just not based in the law. And I think she's going to get reversed again by the 11th Circuit if she pursues these jury instructions that she proposed to Jack Smith, which interpret the Presidential Records Act completely erroneously.
All of the cases against him seem to be mired down in the legal system in one way or another. What does it say about our legal system?
Well, the legal system needs to have buy-in from the people, and because who's going to enforce the laws? If the legal system, the judiciary interprets the laws, it's up to the executive branch and really all of us to enforce and abide by the laws. And so you have no faith in the Supreme Court. That undermines the entire legal system, our faith in the rule of law, and you could have anarchy, because if you don't respect the rulings of the Supreme Court, if you think of it as a political institution, then it undermines the entire rule of law, and it hurts our entire country and all of our institutions. So I would hope that the Supreme Court, with the leadership of Chief Justice Roberts, will do things like enact an ethics rule that prevents justices from voting on matters where, for example, their wife's involved in it, like Clarence Thomas voting on January 6th related cases, even though his wife was involved with January 6th. That makes no sense. And it destroys the credibility of the court when you have that. So I'm hoping that we could hopefully rebuild the faith in our institutions, but a lot of that comes from people within the institutions themselves.
Donald Trump says he's immune from prosecution. The Supreme Court has said, well, we'll take a look at that. and so the case gets pushed later and later. What do you think about this claim of immunity?
The president does not have absolute immunity. We don't have a king, we have a president. There's a reason why we left the crown so many years ago. But the Supreme Court is now stepping in on a case where they didn't need to. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals came out with a very thorough, very powerful ruling saying, no, there is no absolute immunity here. Getting involved in state-run elections is not part of your job as president. And so I didn't think the Supreme Court needed to get involved, but they did, and they gave Trump what he wanted, which was a delay. And now that case against him that was going to be tried before the election interference case in Washington, D.C., is put on hold. And we don't know if it's going to be tried before the election, and if it doesn't get tried before the election, it may never go to trial at all, because if Trump gets elected, he's going to order his attorney general to drop everything.
Why is the Supreme Court playing into Donald Trump?
You can talk about that for a long time. People have different theories. Some people think that they're a political institution in the books in the can for Donald Trump. I wouldn't go that far, because you've seen that the 3 justices whom Trump appointed have ruled against him on things like his taxes, disclosing documents to the January 6th committee, the election so-called fraud that Trump alleged. Those 3 justices came out against him on all those issues. But when it came to this one, they needed 5 votes for the stay, and they got it, 5 out of 9. And so it looks like at least one of those justices went along and decided to put the D.C. case on ice for now. And I think that really hurts the rule of law, because no one's above the law. And that was a case where you had a judge, and Judge Chutkan, who wanted it to be tried. And the Supreme Court came in and said, even though you asked us to get involved in this case early on, Jack Smith, and we said no, now we want to, right before the case is going to go to trial. We're going to get involved now. So it doesn't look good. It smells bad. But I'm not willing to say it's corruption. I think that there's more at play here. I think that the justices are being tone deaf. I don't think they are really cognizant of the fact that you need to have a decision before the election. That's what the public wants. And if you just delay and delay, you are abrogating the rule of law.
Complicit.
Well, you could say that, yeah. I don't like what they did. You know, another reason why you could say complicit and attribute nefarious motives is because when Trump wanted the Supreme Court to intervene right away in the Colorado case, right, whether or not he can be on the ballot in Colorado and other states, the Supreme Court expedited the matter, and they gave him the ruling right away, and it was a unanimous ruling in his favor. But when Trump wanted to slow walk the D.C. election interference case, the Supreme Court accommodated that as well. So, no, I'm not willing to say there's corruption, but I just think that the court does have a political bias. And we saw this, not the first time you've seen this. You saw this with Bush v. Gore in 2000. Right. Your students are too young to remember that, but the Supreme Court ruled based on their party affiliation who was going to be the next president of the United States.
I, as an American, look at this whole system and look at what's happened, and I want to throw my arms up. You do lose faith after a while. I mean, you're saying maybe they're playing politics and stuff like that, but that's not how it was supposed to be.
No, they're not supposed to be political. That's why they get lifetime appointments.
Right.
You're supposed to be above politics, but I can see why people think that it's political. I mean, I think that politics plays into it when you have a justice sitting on the court who will not recuse himself, even though his wife was involved in January 6th. And you have justices giving speeches to the Federalist Society, which is a political legal organization. I just think that it's different than it used to be. Now, with that said, I am not willing to throw out the Supreme Court as a political, corrupt institution. I don't think it's corrupt. I do think, though, that politics seeps in when it shouldn't. And unfortunately, it seems to seep in at the worst possible times.
And when someone like Donald Trump comes around, they're playing by the old rules, or political rules perhaps, and they're not seeing the incredible threat that he poses to this country.
Yeah, well...
Do you think he poses an incredible threat to the country?
Well, judge him by his words. I mean, look at his own words. He tells you what he's going to do. He says he's going to be a dictator on day one, and he's made other comments that make you wonder if our democracy will survive. We could, he looks up to dictators and in Hungary, Viktor Orban, who took a democracy and has whittled it away. So would that happen here? Without getting too political, I do worry about the future of our democracy. And when you keep undermining institutions, then it hurts us all. And when you only believe in elections when you win, that hurts us all.
Why do you think so many people love him, follow him?
Well, he's a charismatic figure who will call out enemies who his supporters think are their enemies too. And there's a long history of political leaders who thrive on dividing us. And we are motivated very often by fear, and he's really good at making us fear. And when there's less to fear about, he'll find something to make us get scared of, like the caravans, the migrant caravans, which always seem to come at us right before the election.
Right.
He's good at getting to your gut and your emotions. And whereas Democrats for years have tried to go to your heads, we have a 20-point plan. Let's talk about how to fix Social Security. Meanwhile, he's out there saying we're going to have a bloodbath at the border. That he goes for the gut. And politics is an emotional business, and you motivate people emotionally. And Democrats need to do a better job of appealing to people's heart and their guts as compared just to their heads. I think that the media is partly to blame in just making it like it's just every normal election. Well, Biden's old, Trump, says things, but Biden's old. It's like Hillary's emails, but Hillary's emails. When one candidate represents an existential threat to democracy, you need to call it out and not treat it like both sides. The newspaper in Cleveland just did that, and they came out with an editorial saying, we're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to do the both sidesism. We're going to cover this as you have one presidential candidate who is old but believes in democracy and another one who's old and doesn't. That's essentially what they wrote in their editorial.
But you seem to be critical of the media for liking all the shiny stuff. True?
Well, I think it's important that when a candidate is lying, you have to call them out on it. You can't just broadcast a lie and not address it. So when you have them talking about the case of election fraud in the last election, no, you have to immediately say that's a lie. That's just not true. It's been proven that's not true. The 2020 election was the fairest, safest election we've ever had. Don't judge me on that. That's from Chris Krebs, a Trump appointee, who said that. He was the director of cybersecurity in charge of election security, and then he was fired for his comments. But that's just the truth, and every judge that heard it agreed, including the 9 members of the Supreme Court. So there's no evidence of any widespread election fraud from 2020, but when he continues to propound it, the media shouldn't just show it and just move on. You have to address it, or else when you repeat a lie enough times, people will accept it as true.
The issue of why people are such followers, there are a lot of very smart people who I think you probably know, who buy into the stuff, or do you think they're just faking it? Congressmen, senators, a lot of them believe, and a lot of people obviously, the election was stolen.
Well, you have 2 types of people. You have the Marjorie Taylor Greens who don't know what they don't know. And they're true believers, and I actually think they are better than the second group, which is the group that knows better and does it anyway for short-term political benefit because they want to save their own political hides. I think that's a worse group, the Kevin McCarthy group of people who know better, but they'll go along with it and incur great damage to our democracy because they want to stay elected. And it never turns out well for them. They end up getting defeated anyways or thrown out as speaker. Right. But you have someone like Martin Taylor Greene and her disciples who don't have a clue, but then there's other people who are smart enough to know better. And I think they're the ones who damage our democracy more.
It seems so unusual that some people who I was taught to respect, congressmen, senators, are prepared to buy into this stuff.
Well, the people have to realize what's going on. It's like the frog being boiled to death. The frog doesn't get boiled to death right away. That temperature increases little by little until the water boils and it's too late. And I think that's a lesson for all of us in our democracy, that you start to see it being etched away. The faith in our institutions starts being undermined. the rhetoric starts to become more heated. The divisiveness continues. And now you don't have any faith in any institution except for one man when he says, don't believe what you see, just believe me. And he said that. And that is where the danger is. And could it lead to violence? I hope it never gets to that. And that's why this election is, and we say it before, but I do think it's the most important election of our lifetimes.
There are a lot of judges who are being attacked by Donald Trump, and their threats that he makes publicly, they don't seem to have full control of their courts. I mean, they try, but he seems to have a way of being able to wangle his way around it.
It is frustrating when you see Donald Trump being treated differently than other defendants. Other defendants aren't allowed to attack the judge and the judge's family and prosecutors and their families. They're not allowed to threaten witnesses. But Trump is given extra deference. And that's one area where I do think that Trump supporters are right when they say there's a two-tiered legal system out there, two-tiered justice system. But it's not for the reasons they say. I do think that Trump gets treated better than others. I do think judges are very cautious about being seen as political. That's the last thing a judge wants. That's the last thing Merrick Garland wants. Right. Because Merrick Garland came from the world of the judiciary. So you have Merrick Garland and judges all saying, you know, we're going to bend over backwards to make sure the public buys into this. But you can't persuade the unpersuadable. And if you kowtow to the extremes for our population, you're going to lose the rest of us who are saying, why is he allowed to do this? And that undermines faith in our criminal justice system and undermines faith in the rule of law. So the judges need to start treating him, I think, like they treat everyone else.
What do I say to my student journalists, people who want to go into journalism? What should they be doing to make this situation get better?
They need to make sure that the truth prevails, and there's only one truth. Don't buy into this view of alternate facts. We heard that from the last administration. There are facts and there are lies, and you need to call them out and be very wary of both sides-ism. The whataboutisms, the both sides-ism, well, both sides do it. No. I think it's lazy thinking when you say, well, you know, both sides do it. Democrats are just as bad as Republicans. I know a lot of people who say that. They throw up their hands, but that's lazy thinking. Look into that. Tell me exactly what is going on, because it's too easy to gloss over it and just say a plague on both their houses. There is a difference between the parties. And like, in my office, I do equal justice under the law. We don't look at party affiliation. When you're talking about politics, though, then politics are about choices. And Joe Biden, I'll leave you with this. Joe Biden likes to say, don't judge me against the almighty. Judge me against the alternative.
I hear that you're not going to run for state attorney again.
Right.
You'd be important to that discussion and that clarification of what's going on and what is truth. Why quit now?
Well, I've done this for 12 years, and I think it's time to just try something new. You know, I've been in politics and government for 20 years, and you know, I'm starting a new chapter in my life, getting married. I want to have children, and I think at this stage of my life, it's good to take a step back to let someone else who I'm going to end up supporting hopefully win the election, and then the policies and the principles of my office won't change. And I'm not going away. I think I can have a bigger platform even as a commentator on national TV and be out there more, do more streaming, because that's where people are going these days, to streaming services. So I may be stepping away from this role, but I'm not stepping away from civic life.